To service these clutch shaft bushings, you need a hammer, needle nose pliers, a 1 1/8 inch socket or vice grips, a 1/4 inch drift pin, a 3/8 inch drift pin, and a large flathead screwdriver. The motor side replacement bag contains a zip tie, a small S-hook, replacement bushing, washer, and E-clip, a new roll pin, and a cotter pin. The hoist side bag also contains a new bushing, washer, and E-clip, as well as a hoist spring with washers, a new roll pin, and a large S-hook. Also in the box, you will find a roll pin replacement tool, a flanged hex bolt with a nut on the end, and 2 composite wood shims. With the motor off and unplugged, we begin by using the flathead screwdriver to remove the V-belt from the motor side. Once it's removed, use the supplied zip tie to hang it to the operator out of your way while you continue working. Next, remove the cotter pin. You can either use needle nose pliers to flatten and then remove the cotter pin, or you could simply cut it with wire cutters and then pull it out. Using a 1 1/8 inch socket or vice grips, loosen the castle nut on the outside of the clutch shaft. Only loosen this nut until it is about hand tight before we move on. Next, take the flanged bolt and remove the nut from the end. Place this nut on the top of the operator for safekeeping, as we will need it soon. Finish unscrewing the castle nut and slide the entire assembly onto the hex bolt. Once you have all of the parts on the bolt, use the nut to secure them in place. We will store this entire assembly on top of the operator for safekeeping while we continue to work. Using a hammer and 1/4 inch punch, pound the cotter pin out of this shaft. There is no need to keep it, we have supplied a replacement. Next, remove the old bushing assembly. The E-clip is removed with a large flathead screwdriver. Feel free to dispose of this E-clip, as we've supplied an extra. Next, remove the washer, which can also be disposed of. Last, remove the bushing by sliding it off the shaft. Once the bushing is removed, be sure to visually inspect the chassis for any kind of damage. Do not touch it though, as it may be sharp. If at this point you see that the shaft has worn through the bushing and into the chassis, showing damage similar to Figure 3 in the instructions provided with this kit, it is important to note that this is only a temporary solution. Please note the serial number of the operator so you can contact LiftMaster for a full chassis or operator replacement. Continue to follow the instructions to replace the bushings, as this will allow temporary service until the replacement arrives. Slide the replacement bushing from the motor side bag into position, making sure to line up the key with the slot on the chassis. Next, slide the replacement washer onto the shaft up against the bushing. Follow this with the E-clip, which needs to be pressed into the groove along the shaft to hold everything in place. The next step uses the roll pin replacement tool and the 2 composite shims. Slide the tool over the shaft to line up with the position of the roll pin. Be sure to rotate the shaft so that the roll pin will be hammered in perpendicular to the wall. Then, use the shims to wedge the tool firmly in place. Next, using the replacement roll pin from the motor side bag, drive it in with a hammer until it bottoms out in the tool. When you remove the shims and tool, be sure the roll pin is all the way in place. Gather the bolt with the pulley assembly and remove the nut from the end. Place this nut on the top again, as we don't want to lose it. Slide the assembly off of the bolt and back onto the shaft as it was before. Only hand tighten the castle nut, as this has to be reset when you reset the clutch after the end of the whole process. Before moving to the other side, use the small S-hook provided to fully lock out the sash chain to the top of the operator. This will release the disconnect on the other side, so it will be out of our way while we work on the other bushing. To replace the bushing on the hoist side, we start by placing the large S-hook in the hole on the bottom of the chassis. Next, use a hammer and a 3/8 punch to remove the roll pin from the end of the shaft. When you remove the punch from the hole, you will likely lose the spring and washers that pop out. This is okay, as again, we have supplied a replacement. Next, again, remove the nut from the end of the flange bolt and put it on top of the operator for safekeeping. Before we remove the assembly from the shaft, we need to first put on the replacement washer, spring, and second washer that we just lost when we pulled the punch out of the shaft. Once these are in place on the bolt, slide the rest of the assembly off of the shaft and onto the bolt and secure it with the nut. As this is a more cumbersome assembly, we will store this one by hanging it on the large S-hook we placed on the bottom of the chassis. Next, remove the bushing assembly as we did on the other side, by doing E-clip, and then washer, and then bushing. Again, you may dispose of the washer and the E-clip, since there are extras provided in the hoist side bag. If the disconnect is making this process too difficult, make sure your sash chain on the opposite side is adequately tightened. Again, once the bushing is removed, visually inspect the chassis for any damage, and don't touch it as it might be sharp. Replace the bushing the same way as we did the other side by lining up the key with the slot on the chassis. The bushing is again followed by the replacement washer and replacement E-clip, which has to be tapped into place in the groove along the shaft. Now that the bushing is replaced, we will put the disconnect back into place. Remove the sash and S-hook from the other side, and the disconnect will rotate back into place. Recover the large hoist assembly from the large S-hook and remove the nut from the end of the bolt. After that, slide the entire assembly back onto the shaft, just as we did on the other side. Be sure that the washers and springs also get brought back onto the shaft. Once you have them on, use the punch to hold them in place so they don't spring off. Use the roll pin replacement tool to hold the washer and springs in place once you remove the punch. Be sure to turn the shaft to align the hole with the tool. Then, use the composite shims to wedge the tool in place. Using a hammer, pound in the replacement roll pin from the hoist side bag. Remove the tool and shims, and be sure that the cotter pin is in the correct position on the shaft. The last steps in this process are to replace the V-belt by placing it partially on and then rotating it and working it back into place. Properly reset the clutch according to the installation manual, and finalize the tightness of the castle nut. When the clutch is properly set and the nut in position, use the cotter pin to lock it in place by sliding it through the hole and then bending it back to keep it there. A green sticker was supplied in the kit, and when you have successfully completed this installation, put it next to the serial number to indicate completion of the change.